talk on the Brazilian Pantanal. And I probably should say straight away that it's called the Brazilian Pantanal because we thought a title that said the Brazilian Pantanal, the Cerrado and Iguazu waterfalls was probably too long a title. But basically, it is a holiday that we run, and we've done it a few times now, that has three main parts to it. So one is in the what's called Cerrado. Um, it's a completely different habitat to what you get in the Pantanal, but it's exceedingly close by to where we start the holiday if you were just going to the Pantanal, which a lot of companies do. So we decided right from the word go, that we would have a few days, couple of 3 days in that habitat, which is quite different, and I'll start there in a minute. Then head down into the Pantanal itself, which is an amazing place. And then we do a flight down to finish the holiday down at Iguazu, which is just spectacular. So the talk will finish there. Um, and it's some pretty good birding around there too, not just the waterfall. So I should note here, I put that map together, and what I think it makes the Pantanal look quite small if you don't really realise the vast size of Brazil. But I must just make this note at this point that the Pantanal is actually bigger than England. So if that gives you a bit more scale, I hope that helps. The Cerrado is quite a different feel to it. It's a huge area of habitat. If you look at that map, obviously, if that Pantanal bit was the size of England, the amount of Cerrado is way bigger. Though, to be honest, it's disappearing at an alarming rate. The problem with Cerrado is it isn't particularly beautiful to look at. People don't lament its loss in quite the same way as Amazonian rainforest. And so if people burn a whole patch of it and then plant things there or grow cattle there or whatever, nobody seems to care so much. But it is quite threatened and it is disappearing. But if you can find some good Cerrado habitat, which is this kind of scrubby, it's described as savanna, scattered trees, a lot of scrub, not particularly attractive to look at, if I'm really honest. So I must admit, the first time I went there, we arrived there, I kind of thought, is this it? But actually, it's very rich in wildlife, so it can be really, really good. And there are some quite scenic bits. There are areas where there are cliffs and pinnacles of rock and stuff. These are sandstone cliffs there. There's waterfalls and stuff, as you'll see in a few minutes. And it is actually well worth including. For this, really, lots of birds, loads of birds, in fact. It can be exceedingly good. It can also be exceedingly hot, and the biggest problem for us there is if it's very hot during the day, you've got to get there crack of dawn. So after a long flight out, we're getting up very early to then go out and get there when everything's active. But there's a lot of birds here which you will definitely not see in the Pantanal itself. They just like this drier habitat. So all of those really, apart from perhaps red pileated finch and maybe rusty-backed ant wren, you really have to go there to see them. And there's a really nice selection of stuff. A few real corkers as well. I think this one, collared crescent chest, it's just exquisite. An absolutely beautiful bird. We don't see it every time. It can be quite a tricky one to see. It's quite a skulker, and it does this call which it repeats and repeats and repeats. And sometimes you know it's right there in front of you, but you just can't find it. But if you do get one, it's a gorgeous little thing. And another one I've only ever seen once, but is only in this habitat, is the horned sun gem, a really beautiful little hummingbird. It's my own photograph of it. The very first trip I ever did, we saw one, and I just assumed, oh, they can't be that difficult then. I've never seen one since, but really, really gorgeous little bird. And a few other really particular ones I like a lot. There's a couple of puff birds, rather like puff birds, a bit like kingfishers in some way, but often with quite striking markings, and they'll pose well. So those two puff birds occur in that habitat. And then there's one or two other rather special things. Red-legged Seriema is it's one of two species really. There's another one called black-legged Seriema in another part of South America. And it's the South American answer to secretary bird, I suppose you might say. If you think of secretary bird in Africa and the fact that they'll run around and they'll stomp on lizards and then eat them, and big grasshoppers and things like that. This bird behaves in very, very much the same way, and it's not that different size-wise. It's perhaps not quite as big, but it's probably 3 foot tall or so. It's a big bird, very, very elegant. So yeah, it's always in my head one of the must-see birds of the trip, really. And even bigger still, greater rhea, which is effectively, if you go to Australia, you've got the emu. If you go to Africa, you've got the ostrich. If you come here, you've got the rheas, and they behave in a very similar way. Very tall. And interestingly, all of them seem to have this habit of the mating is interesting. The males are the ones that hatch the eggs, and they usually get several females who will come and lay in their nest, and then they will rear all the chicks from several females. So quite an interesting strategy. But the list of birds there is fabulous, and we might not get them all on each trip, but if you actually add them all up over all the trips I've done, it's really great. Some of these are really smart. I love the curl-crested jay, for example. White-tailed hawks, super smart. Butternut owls really common there. We see often several in a day. And I'll show you more red and green macaws in a moment, because the next place I want to show you is this. This is a lovely place. You see that waterfall, the top left there, that's called the Bride's Vale. Probably loads of waterfalls around the world are called the Bride's Vale, but that's what this one's called. And it's obviously falling through into a canyon of sandstone cliffs, place where you get cliff flycatcher, you get a whole bunch of other birds around here. And down in the bottom of the valley, it's a different habitat again. You've got this kind of riparian woodland, and we do visit a bit of that, which has another whole selection of other birds again, different things like jacamars, various woodpeckers and things which you wouldn't get in a Cerrado either. But the lovely thing from this viewpoint is you quite often see the red and green macaws from above. They seem to really like hanging around in this valley, so you often get several views, and they just look so smart. They're just beautiful things. This is where we stay. Really nice lodge with swimming pool, nice sitting area, lovely dining room, which is actually outdoors. So you can sit there at the dining table with your binoculars at hand as there's birds coming to the bird feeders there, choppy blackbirds and scaled doves and all sorts of things. There's a lot of birds, even just to walk around the grounds. You can probably pick up 30 odd species. But a couple of highlights, ferruginous pygmy owl, I put a picture of that there because we often get those in the grounds there, and Amazonian motmot. It used to be called blue crown motmot, that's been split now, so Amazonian motmot is there. They're in the grounds as well, rather nice. And I still have great hopes that maybe one day when I leave this trip we'll get one of these. I've still never seen one, but they do get them, and I can still remember one year coming back to the lodge at the end of the day, and they said, "Oh, we were hoping you were going to come back earlier." 20 minutes ago, two maned wolves were wandering across the lawn, and you just think, "Oh, 20 minutes." So maybe one day, but that would be just awesome. So they're there, and the interesting thing is we have seen. It may not be my photograph of the wolf, but it is my photograph of the wolf apple, which is it's a member of the tomato family, and the wolves love them. So although they are a dog, and you would imagine they're going to completely eat meat, they actually particularly like this fruit. And so where you've got a lot of those fruits, you've got good chances of maned wolf. So that kind of sums up rather briefly. Just we have a couple of whole days in that region, and there's I could have shown a stack of other birds as well. There are mannequins there and all sorts of things. But from there we move on and we head down into the Pantanal, which is obviously the title of the talk. And as you can see there, it's a very, very different habitat, with the Cerrado being very dry and bushy and scrubby. The Pantanal is a much wetter place. And if we ask the question, what is the Pantanal? Because it's a kind of a known region. A lot of people have heard of it, but not necessarily everybody realizes what it is. But it is actually the world's biggest wetland, and it is huge. We come back to that map. So it's the largest wetland, and I've got some figures there for you for the size of it, 140 to 195 square kilometers, which is a huge difference between those two numbers. And I think that's partly because it depends to some extent on the season, if it's the dry season or the wet season, and it also depends how much rain there has been. But if you imagine this is where the rain from a huge chunk of the Andes eventually ends up before it then drains off into the sea eventually in one of the big rivers. Um, it is a massive, massive area, but it's a huge amount of rain that's finally ending up there. And as I said, it's larger than some countries. And one of those countries is England. It's actually bigger than England, and that's the size of England there. So it's another, even at its smallest measure, it's 10,000 kilometers, square kilometers less than the size, bigger than the size of England. So quite remarkable. Um, I say it's a wetland, but it's actually technically what's called a seasonal wetland. So although it is wet all year round, some bits of it are wet only at certain times of year, whilst other bits remain wet all the time. During the wet season, the water levels rise and they can be really quite substantially underwater in areas that are dry later on in the dry season. But the interesting thing is, as during the wet season, it completely floods over a huge area. In the dry season, as the water goes down and it's not being replenished with more rain, the water sort of becomes more concentrated into small areas. And if you imagine during the wet season, some of the fish are breeding and they produce large numbers of young ones. And then in the dry season, all those fish get concentrated into these smaller pools. It can concentrate all the birds and the mammals and things as well. So going late on-ish in the dry season is the best time to go. The wet season starts in sort of October, November. So if you're going in August or September, around about then, that's a really good time. This map shows kind of where we go, and if you look right near the top of the map, there's a pink line with an arrowhead on the end that starts up at a place called Chapada dos Guimarães, and that is where we start the holiday. So that's where we've been when we're looking at the Cerrado habitat. It goes then all the way down to a place called Porto Jofre, and Porto Jofre is where we finish in the Pantanal. And that pink line coming down into the Pantanal, there are very, very, very few roads at all that go there. That road is actually called the Transpantaneira. And the Transpantaneira is originally a dirt track that they put in with the attempt to try and allow more cattle ranching there, try and make some money out of the area because it was too wet to kind of do anything with it. So imagine the problem then that they've got in that you are putting this track in across a huge wet area, and that wet area, the water is flowing. So they needed to put in bridges to allow the movement of water still. And there were 120 bridges on a dirt road that's only 90 miles long, which is quite remarkable. They're in the process of replacing a lot of them now. Some of them were really dodgy. And I remember the first couple of times I went, some of them you really had your heart in your mouth as you were going over them, thinking, I can't even see the bridge. It was quite unnerving, but a lot better now. So this takes you right into the heart of the of the Pantanal, but it's interesting that it also goes from kind of the drier, slightly higher altitude area. You're not dropping a great deal. It looks flat as a pancake to the eye, but you are dropping a bit. So the further down the Transpantaneira you go, the wetter it gets. And this is us right at the entrance to it. You can see in the background there's a cow there, so there is some success with getting the ranching going. But just the other side of that fence is actually a pool, and as you're going down the Transpantaneira, you can see how close to the surface the water is. There really is a sort of constant. There are just pools everywhere, constant level of water to be seen, and depending on how the dry season's going or the wet season, whether that can be just a series of pools or it can be all through the grass. So it varies a bit from year to year when I've been. I suspect that's probably the best year I've ever been in terms of some of the pools drawing in huge numbers of fish-eating birds, and this was remarkable. And it can always it's odd actually because as you're going down through the track, you're passing quite a lot of pools, and some of the pools have very little on them, and then others seem to be heaving with stuff. So I'm not quite sure why some must obviously be concentrating more fish than others. Maybe they're just a bit shallower at that time, so they're easier to fish in, or what, I don't know. But as you can see here, lots and lots and lots of herons and egrets and storks, and there's limpkins there, and there'll be all sorts of stuff going on. Very exciting when you see it like that. These are jabiroos, massive, massive storks. I mean, when they're stood upright, they can look you in the eye. They are that tall. They're as big as marabou storks in Africa. Absolutely colossal things. Fabulous birds. Wings are completely white. You see them in flight and they just look amazing. And then there's a load of different other storks and things. Great white egrets, snowy egrets, little blue heron. Rufescent tiger heron is reasonably common there. I've never seen many anywhere else. So it's a really great bird to see. Whistling heron there, that's a kind of weird looking thing, I think. They're not very common even there, and you kind of see on an average trip maybe three, four or so. This is sunbitten, quite a widespread bird, but and we vary really on how many we see. It seems to be getting scarcer to me, but we do usually see at least maybe three or four on a trip. One of the early trips we had stacks of them. So they vary in numbers a bit, but they are gorgeous birds. They're not actually a bittern. They are a sunbitten. They're the only one in its family. It's one of these unusual one species families. Super looking bird. And when they fly, they have these big colourful patches in the wings, which are really, really. They talk about being like Spitfire rings, you know. These are limpkins. These eat apple snails, and there are loads of apple snails in this area. Apple snails are a water snail that can grow. A fully sized one is about as big as your fist, so it's quite a meal in there. Limpkins love them. I remember the very first time I went, just recently before it, led a trip to Florida, and we'd made a huge effort. We'd gone to Corkscrew Swamp and gone round and round and round it trying to find a limpkin, and we eventually managed to find one limpkin. And then I came here and thought, why do we do that? Just astonishing numbers of them there. And the same with snail kites. Again, in Florida, you might put a huge effort in and see two or three. Here, sometimes you can stand in one spot and scan around and spot 10, from one place. So, and these also are, as the name implies, a big snail eater. These are also eating these apple snails. And whilst the limpkins will smash into the shell to get at the insides, these guys use that astonishing bill to winkle the animal out. So quite a different strategy. And there's just stacks of other great birds. This is Savannah hawk. It's a real bird of big wide open grasslands. Oops, I've not quite squeezed that bird in, by the looks of it. Large-billed tern, super looking thing. I tried to put a second picture in there to show you because I think the upper wing pattern is beautiful and it's rather like a Sabine's gull if you're familiar with them. But quite an impressive bird, quite a large tern. And then there are other smaller birds, things like white-headed marsh tyrants, and this is a black-capped Dolichobius. Real one-off. There's nothing else quite like it, really. Although technically it's related to the wrens. Hard to believe when it's about the size of a thrush, but a really smart bird, I think. And then we also, as we drive along this road, we're constantly on the lookout for marsh deer. Um, this is a tall species of deer. And if you look at the legs on it, it's got these incredibly long legs to cope with the fact that it's a lot of the time literally up to its knees or higher in water. So quite well adapted to that situation. Its feet are even slightly webbed. So yeah, very unusual. And then you see a lot of these Yachare caiman. Um, they're quite a decent size they can get up to, quite impressive. And you see huge numbers of them in some places, all lined up along the bank, warming up in the sun. It's very typical caiman pose there with his head up like that. That's something caiman do a lot. Apparently they're fish eaters, so they're not really a threat to you. If you could walk amongst those, and in theory they wouldn't attack you. Don't know whether I'd quite trust it. That's quite a big looking one, isn't it? So they can get to a big size eventually, and there's a lot of them. And then as we're driving down this road, you are getting closer and closer to our first lodge, about halfway down the Transpantanera. And our aim isn't really to get there in the dark, but at the same time, we don't want it too bright, and I'll explain that in a minute. So as we're finally getting closer to there's a turn off that goes down to our lodge, we are beginning to see birds going to roost, and you see large numbers of herons and egrets all flying off in the same direction, and they're all gathering in certain trees that they particularly favour. So these are all wood stalks. There's one great egret in the middle there, but quite an impressive sight. This is a black-collared hawk, a real fish eater. And it's got a fish there, and as light's beginning to fade, it's getting more and more beautiful. And the aim is that we arrive finally at the gate that takes us down the road to our lodge. So we're on the main drag, so to speak. There's a gateway with a padlock on it. We get the key for that. So we can then go. It's about a seven. Gosh, I can't remember. Is it 7 kilometers? 7 miles? I can't remember which. But anyway, there's a separate dirt track that then comes from the main drag down to our lodge where we're staying. And basically, there are quite a lot of cars use the Trans-Pantanal itself. And because of the noise of those cars, you don't get quite so many animals near that main road, but you've got better chances of animals as you're going down to the lodge. So we get spotlight and we actually scan for things as we go. And this is an absolute treat. I love doing it. And, that's Brazilian tapir. You've got reasonably good chances of Brazilian tapir. We've never done a trip and failed to see it. Sometimes you've had three or four, but they're just great things. They're big, really impressive looking beasts. This was the one we had this year. It was almost daylight and we'd only just started going down the road, and almost immediately we were straight into this tapir that was having a drink at the side of the road in this muddy puddle. Fantastic animals. I just think they're so impressive. I mean, they are big looking things, you know, and the little cute tips to the ears, little white tips to the ears, I think just makes them really. And we look out for other stuff as we go. So there's quite a few species we can look for. There's two different species of brocket deer, grey and red for obvious reasons. About the size of a roe deer, I suppose, maybe slightly smaller, but quite attractive deer really. And then the top one is crab-eating fox. Now these are actually quite common, and sometimes you can see half a dozen just in that journey from the main road down to the lodge. Collared peccary at the bottom left is also plausible. We've seen that probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 times from that road. The other two are really, really, you got to be lucky. So ocelot I've seen twice. First time for about a second, the second time for a bit longer. So on the second time, somebody managed to even get that photograph, which I thought was remarkable. We didn't get a photograph of the puma that we saw this year. It was actually a pretty damn good view. It was very brief, but you would have had to have been so quick to have got a photograph of it. But it was close. It was fantastic. Everybody was thrilled. But yes, that's a puma from Patagonia trip that I've led. But still, you get the idea. So there's things out there, exciting possibilities. At that first lodge, twice now, I've actually seen giant anteater. It's not an easy species. It's always been on the list as a possible. And the first couple of trips I did, we didn't see any. So I think I've seen them on about half the trips now. The one in this picture was not this year's one. This year's one, I didn't really get any good photos of it. But again, it was in the dark. And both times we've been eating our evening meal and you're happily munching away and chatting away and having a laugh, and then all of a sudden the door bangs open and somebody goes, giant anteater, and you all leave your food on the table and run outside and try and work out where on earth it is. And on this particular occasion, it was bizarre. We ran outside and we could see torches up ahead. And as we ran over there, the guy that actually owns the place was just coming up to the anteater with a big bowl in his hand, and he was breaking eggs into the bowl. And he placed the bowl in front of the anteater, and it immediately started licking. He was like slurping the eggs out of the bottom of this bowl. And as it was doing so, he was breaking more eggs in and more eggs in. So he probably broke about a dozen eggs into this bowl, and the anteater slurped the lot up. So I don't know. I thought he ate ants. Apparently, they quite like eggs. He knew this as a child. He'd had somebody bring an anteater there to their home and an injured one, and they'd reared it, but couldn't think what to feed it because obviously you can't collect millions of ants. So they tried eggs, and apparently it just loved the eggs. So anyway, this is a particular individual that occasionally comes through the lodge, and when it does, he tries to slow its very, it would very quickly just walk through the grounds and be away. So in a bid to kind of let people get a view of it, he tries to slow it down by doing this thing with the eggs. And it then licked all the eggshells. You can see those there by its feet before wandering off. But honestly, fantastic. What a treat to see such a bizarre animal. They really are peculiar. Best view we've had of one, I'll show you the photograph of that in a minute, which was we did have one once in broad daylight. But so this lodge, um, it's not the most well-appointed lodge, let's say. It's quite basic, but the grounds are absolutely fantastic. There are so many birds in that area, and it's just wonderful. And in the grounds themselves, at the back of the kitchen, they put food out for birds, and they get loads of these. These are yellow-billed cardinals, right? Rather handsome. And when they put the food down, they get loads of stuff coming down to the ground to comfort them. There's lots of cowbirds and oropendulas. These are all saffron finches at the top, and barred dove, and there's ruddy ground doves, and all sorts of things coming in, including some quite big things like guans and things like these big chickeny things. And above the ground, they also have posts where they kind of put fruit out, and they get fruit-eating things coming into those, including this guy. This is a chestnut-eared aracari. So arasaris are like a group of smaller toucans, so the same family but considerably smaller. And then the creme de la creme, the one that you hear an audible gasp when this guy comes in. What a bird! This is a Taco toucan, absolutely spectacular thing. Um, it, I mean, words fail me really. It's just the most wonderful bird to see, and it was high on my wanted list when I went there. And then when you see it, it's no disappointment. It's a huge thing, and the bill is massive, all out of all proportion. This is the one that used to be the star of the Guinness advert years ago. Um, the bill apparently isn't very heavy at all. They're pretty empty inside with very fine structures, a bit like some of the bird's bones as well, to keep it very light. But it's very useful for all sorts of things, for showing off, but also reaching inside holes and eating baby birds, would you believe? Horrible. But they eat a lot of fruit, huge amounts of fruit. That's their favourite, really. So they certainly will happily come down and eat bananas or mango or whatever fruit they're putting out for them on this bird table. And you get just within yards, 2 or 3 yards of them. They're fabulous. As I said, the grounds are really good. It's so hard to decide what birds to show you because, I could just keep going with slides after slide after slide like this with birds that we see in the grounds there. There are stacks and stacks of things. But there's a few that I've got particularly good photos of. Um, One of my favourites is that top centre one, the red-billed scythebill. I remember looking at the picture in the book of that and thinking, really? Is its bill really like that? And then you see it and you think, yeah, it really, really is. It's just the weirdest of beaks, presumably for probing into deep holes and things. And then the Guira cuckoos are rather lovely. That's top left. Guira cuckoos are a sociable cuckoo. So, unlike most cuckoos, which are going to be laying eggs in other birds' nests, these rear their own young, but they will all lay into one nest and sort of incubate them together. So it's almost part way to laying in somebody else's nest. You're laying in somebody else's nest, he just happens to be the same species as you. And they're incredibly sociable, very, very they go around in flocks and they feed together and cuddle up together. It's really nice if you sometimes see a flock of them, and there might be half a dozen of them all side by side along a little branch there, all mutually preening and stuff. They're rather sweet. And from this place, we go out in these sort of open-sided safari-style jeep things. So you're quite high up, so you get a really good view. You've got no glass in the way if you're taking photographs. It can be a bit dusty, but that's about the only problem. Apart from that, it's just fantastic. So we can then go out amongst the trees and bushes. There's various tracks you can follow, and you can find lots more birds. And some of these birds, as you can see, like the white-winged swallow and the wattle jacana and stuff, are very much beside water. So you're stopping at various ponds and looking at herons and egrets and all the rest of it. Um, and then there's also jacanas. That's wattle jacana at the bottom left. White-winged swallows are pretty much always over water. And then you're going through scrubby, bushy areas and under big trees and stuff, and finding some of these other interesting birds, parrots, and um, these long-tailed ground doves are rather nice. They're really small, tiny, way smaller than a collared dove. And they have these, it doesn't really show very well there, but those purple spots in the wing are quite iridescent, so they're really quite smart. We even see what you would might consider nocturnal birds, but in daylight. So this is great horned owl at the bottom right there, a huge owl, very impressive, and they nest there. And the locals find out where the nests are, so you can go and actually see them at the nest. The one we saw this year was calling a lot. It was quite impressive. And then the great potu is an amazing bird. That one there, they're standing out a bit more than they sometimes do. Very often they can be really hard to spot because they literally look like part of the tree. They will just pose in the same way as a broken branch or something lying along the branch. So that's a kind of nightjar, I suppose, would be the nearest family. And they are behave like flycatchers, a bit like most nightjars. So they will stay on the branch and just watch for moths flying by and fly out and grab them. They look like they've got this tiny little beak at the front, but it's actually a huge mouth. And then one or two other mammals. We look out for Azara's capuchins. They're pretty widespread up there, reasonably common. I always feel slightly guilty about these. I always feel like I should like them more, but for some reason I'm not that bothered about monkeys. Although I do like the little black-tailed marmosets. They're very funny looking with that pink nose, but they're quite cute. They're about the size of a squirrel, so they're really small, with this incredibly long black tail. You can see that lying down the length of the branch there. And they make these incredibly high-pitched calls, almost the pitch of a gold crest or something. It's really so high, a lot of people can't hear it. And so, if you can hear them, you sort of pick them out in the trees and then see these things dashing along the branches at high speed. Quite impressive. Some years there's lots of these trees in flower, and it can really liven up the view of the landscape. All these pink trees, pink ipes they're called, or they're a member of the Tababuya family. So they're, I think they're a legume actually. So these are beautiful, and most years we see quite a few of these in flower, which are really lovely. But as you can see, there are all those little grey lumps that are sticking up of these things. These are all termite mounds, and I always scan these areas very carefully any time of day. Although middle of the day, you'd be very surprised to be lucky enough to find one. But we have in the past years ago, as we were leaving on the very last day, we had that giant anteater wandering around in broad daylight, and it walked across the track right behind the bus. That was absolutely fantastic. So we were very lucky there. Um, if you actually go and touch one of these termite mounds, they're rock hard. I mean, they just feel like concrete. I don't know whether the anteaters can break into them, but bear in mind that there's probably more going on under the ground than there is in those tall pinnacles. A lot of that's to do with getting air and cool them down or heat them up or whatever. It's all to do with thermal control. But a lot of the termites are actually under the ground, so I'd imagine that the anteaters probably actually dig into the ground rather than try and break those open. And there's actually more than one species of anteater in the area. This is another species of anteater called a southern tamandua. And this is really, it's an arboreal creature. You would expect to find this up the trees, which actually makes it a bit harder to find because, if it's all leafy or whatever, they can be hidden quite well. This one was on the ground, however. I don't know whether it was heading between one tree and another or what, but we got very nice views of it. Very cute. Nothing like as big as giant anteater, but still rather handsomely marked. And then one year we were told that there was a tapir with a calf that was coming to this particular pool where they had this little sort of hide type thing, all of a screen really. So we decided that, the guys that told us said it was coming about 3 o'clock every day. So we made sure we were there at the right time and just hung around. And there were lots of birds coming down too. And then after a half an hour or so, suddenly out she came. And that was really nice to have a chance to see a young one. It's still got a little bit of the striping left when they're really, really young. They're like humbugs, really, really stripy all over. And then those stripes gradually fade as they get bigger, but you can see they're still there on that one just. But rather a treat. Sorry, excuse me, drinking all the time and throats. I'm actually just recovering from COVID at the moment, so my throat is still a bit hoarse. One other thing we do from that lodge, we actually go to another lodge where we get on some boats and we head up this river, which is not the one where we go and look for jaguars, which I'll tell you about later. It is, however, sometimes we've seen otters here, or giant otters, both actually. Um, there's sometimes quite some different birds, but one of the big treats on this boat trip is this. There are black-collared hawks that know the boat, basically, and they're aware of the fact that if they watch this boat, the guy in the back's going to chuck a fish out at some point. So you get an opportunity to see a black-collared hawk actually fly in, grab the fish from the surface really close to you, and then carry it off to a branch and eat it. So that's really is a brilliant treat. It's a handsome bird, the black-collared hawk, I think. Really beautiful looking things. Um, but in this respect, it's a great opportunity to try and get that flight shot of one actually picking up a fish. So there's a lot in that area, and we spend, a few days at that lodge before we then move to the far end, as far south as you can go on the Transpantan, the area to our next lodge, which is this one. So this is Porta Joffre. Very nice lodge indeed, beautiful rooms, um, lovely grounds. There's a pool behind it which attracts waders and things and other birds, so that's a nice plus. So you can actually see a lot of birds in those grounds. And we also usually, before we leave, do a walk on some tracks the other side of that pool, where you can get a whole stack of different birds up in the trees and things there as well. So it's a great place. This is just a really small selection of some of the birds that you can see there. There really are tons more. Some real special ones though. White woodpecker's rather nice, and it's kind of weird woodpecker because they're very sociable. So rather than with most woodpeckers where you just see one or two at a time, sometimes you can see flocks of white woodpeckers, and they're very noisy too. So they draw attention to themselves. Um, that particular photo was taken. There were actually five more up in the trees scattered around as well. Campo flicker, that's another woodpecker. So it's a little bit like you've got our spotted woodpeckers, and then you've got green woodpecker, and their behaviour is quite different. So all of the flickers are a bit like our green woodpecker in that they spend a lot of time on the ground. You're more likely to see one of those in the grass than you are up a tree, because they're really great feeders on ants and termites. So that one, that was actually feeding mainly on the ground underneath that tree that it's just hopped up into as we're trying to get its photo. Some of the others, Nakunda nightjars are a migrant through there. That's a really impressive nightjar. They're big, really big, like dwarf ours. They almost look like a huge lapwing or something in flight. And then, as I said, there's this pool behind, and the sort of barefaced ibis there is on that pool. Sometimes we get some of the American waders there, like pectoral sandpipers and stuff. So it's a great place. One of the big highlights there is this, though. One of the birds of the Pantanal. It's a very range restricted bird. This is the biggest parrot in the world. This is hyacinth macaw. Huge birds, very noisy, very raucous. They roost in the grounds, so if we don't see them around during daylight, then we make sure we're there at dusk on one day so that we can actually see them come into roost. And they're just so playful. You will see these things just mucking about all the time. They'll go up in the treetops and hang by their beaks and just dangle, or they'll. I've seen them before now where one of them will hang upside down and the other one will hang off its beak by its beak. So it's like One's upside down, the other one's hanging off its beak, or just dangling there, you know. So they're very, very, very playful. They have a lot of fun. And they've got the most astonishing bill. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. That nut thing that it's eating there is a particular kind of date palm, which the seed heads, the stones themselves are just so hard. Trying to cut them with a knife is really hard, but these guys just slice them up. So don't get your finger in there, I would say. But no, spectacular birds, and probably bird-wise, one of the absolute highlights of the trip, really. So from here, this is Jaguar Central, and I've always been a little bit puzzled. I suppose it kind of makes sense in terms of searching because you cover a lot of ground. But given that there's sort of all those caiman around all the pools, and also there's capybaras out there and stuff, why the jaguars are particularly along the river, I'm not entirely sure. But this is how you search for jaguars. And what you do is you get on a boat and you basically cruise down the river. And as you go, you are scanning the banks. If I'm honest, I was slightly surprised first time I went. In my head, I was going to be going through rainforest or something, and it was going to be tall trees on the side of the river. That's how I imagined it. And you were going to be in the jungle looking for jaguars. When I got there and it looked like this, I thought, oh, looks quite scrubby, really. So it's not, again, not all that beautiful in some ways. I do like it, actually. It's grown on me. But you're looking along the top of that embankment there. I don't know if you can see my arrow, but along that sort of height very often, or along the sand itself, for jaguars that they might be just resting, they might be walking, they could be hunting, but that's what you're looking for. And so you can cover in a boat very large areas and just scan and scan and scan. However, as a birder, you can get quite distracted by other things. There's lots of birds along the river too. So black skimmers are fairly common. We even see them skimming sometimes, as they call it, where they tip their lower bill right into the water and skim along. Collared plovers, capped herons, I think a particularly beautiful heron. Pied plovers, very, very nice. And then you get these southern screamers, which are huge, massive, great fat birds with this funny little bill. They're a really odd looking bird, I think. I always assume they might be related to turkeys and things like that, but they're actually most closely related to geese. There are various kingfishers. These three are probably, oh, actually, two of those are the most common. You see a lot of ringed and a lot of Amazon. You see some green. I should have put that in there. I forgot it. But American pygmy kingfisher's tiny. So ring kingfisher is one of the biggest in the world. I would say American pygmy kingfisher, not including the bill, is probably be about the size of the ring kingfisher's head. So the size difference between those two is enormous. And they're really cute American pygmy kingfishers. So what else are we looking for? We're looking for these guys. That's a sungrebe. Much, much harder to find. They're not a grebe. They actually feed on insects, but they swim underneath overhanging branches along the shore of the river and try and pick insects off the overhanging leaves. So it's quite a different feeding strategy to grebes. You don't see them dive under the water at all. And then along the bank, there are these lovely jaguar food. Capybaras. They are jaguar food. Jaguars love capybara and they love caimans. So that's what they're hunting for along the banks there. And you see quite a lot of capybaras along the riverside as you go. Little clusters of them. Usually they're fabulous animals, I think. They always look a little bit aloof, I think. They're sort of looking down their nose at you somehow. But they're very, very cute. They're the biggest rodent in the world, capybara. This is greater capybara. There is a slightly smaller species in Central America. But this is typical of what you see. Little clusters of them, family groups, lots of young ones. And they're just worth seeing in themselves. They're just lovely looking things. Another big target is this thing. This is giant otter. We're always very, very keen to see that, and we'll put quite a bit of effort into trying to find them. Not usually too hard. This year they proved a bit tricky. We did see them though, and they can just be fantastic things. They're quite big. I mean, giant otter sort of suits them really. They can be up to about 5 feet long. But they don't seem to sort of look that huge when you see them. Um, in the past, we've had quite a lot of times where we've actually seen them successfully fishing, and you can, if they are busy fishing, you can just hang around with them, and they'll carry on fishing in front of you, diving in amongst the weeds. Usually in a family group, there might be about five of them together, say. If one of them catches something, they're not keen on sharing particularly. The others will pester them. So what they'll sometimes do if they catch something is they'll swim away a little bit and come up on their own and crunch it all up on their own whilst the others carry on up the river. So you can then stay with that one and watch, and you just get these fabulous views of them when they're doing that. But the noise, oh God, the noise of the crunching bones is really quite something. They are also identifiable as individuals. You can see that top right one, he's got that lovely stripe down his throat. Well, it's not necessarily a stripe. It can be spots, it can be blotches, it can be sort of big spots, small spots at random, all sorts. So you can actually identify individuals from these throat markings, a little bit like pine martins that we do up in Speyside. But yeah, well worth seeing, and one of the biggest highlights, really. However, we're back to scanning the riverbanks. And we're scanning along this habitat here, constantly trying to ignore the birds, trying to ignore everything else, and spot a jaguar. Have you spotted it? It's there, look. As you can see, it's not always easy. I mean, that picture I've just showed you, yeah, I know there's a jaguar in it, but it's remarkably easy when you're going through this habitat to miss one that's asleep underneath the bushes, or even if he's out in the open, they've, well camouflaged beasties. So it can be slightly frustrating when you don't spot one, and then you suddenly realise the boat that's following you has just gone through the same stuff, and he's just spotted one that you think, damn, we should have spotted that. But oh God, they're just what an animal it is. I think it's one of the most beautiful animals I've ever seen. They're right up there with tiger. I, you know, I can't think of any other animal I've seen more beautiful than maybe this one and tiger are right up there for me. Aren't they just beautiful? For me, somehow they're slightly more impressive even than leopard. I mean, I know they're very similar. These have kind of rosettes of markings with internal markings inside them, which leopards don't have. They just have spots, really. But look at that. Isn't that just... Ooh, it gives me goosebumps every time I see them. I just think they're the most fantastic creatures. This one looking very intently, presumably watching a caiman or something, trying to judge his moment. And you can see those rosette markings on the flanks there with those internal spots, which make this a jaguar, not a leopard. And these photographs are either mine or guests, and even now when I look at them, I think, crikey, I never thought I'd ever see a jaguar, let alone get photos like these. It really is quite a treat. And then this year we discovered that they've actually got a book where you can name your jaguar. So if you find a jaguar, you can photograph it and you can compare the markings with the animals in the book. The local guides who are on the boats, the people on the boats, tend to know them quite well. So you can look at markings, particularly on the forehead, but also the flanks and sometimes on the throat. They sometimes have thicker black barring and thing on the throat that you can really pick out. So we were actually able to name all the jaguars that we saw this year, find them in the book. The one on the top left there, Bagua, he's a male. And look at the shape of his head. Very broad, rather chunky looking and hefty. Compare that to Pixana down the bottom right. Sorry, my arrow's still there. Um, Such a much sort of slighter looking face, a slimmer face, less flat top to the crown somehow. So males and females do have a subtly different look to them. The nice thing about the book for me isn't the fact that it means I can give it a name. I'm not particularly worried about naming them, but it does mean you can find a bit more about them. So you can find out how many years they've been seen here. So some of them have been seen every year since kind of 1915 or 2015 or whatever, or even earlier. You can also find out relationships. So you might find out that one of them is the son or daughter of one of the other ones that you've seen. And it's interesting to see that they're still sort of in similar places. They're not far away from where they were brought up. So, there's some quite interesting stuff that you can find out by looking these animals up. Some of them have been seen every single year for, 15 years or whatever. Um, this is this is what it's like. So just so you got a feel for it, you can see how far away the bank is. You can see all of us there with our cameras getting very excited. So it's not that far away. You can get some fabulous photographs. But I'll be honest with you, if you were thinking of doing the trip, I feel I need to warn you of the fact that there can be a lot of boats. The etiquette now is that if you find your own Jaguar, you enjoy it for a few minutes, and then you radio it out. Now, the result of that is that if somebody else finds a Jaguar and it's radioed out, your boat suddenly picks up speed and whizzes off at speed, and you end up getting to see a Jaguar. Whereas years ago, before there was lots of radios between and they weren't cooperating with each other in the same way, you really had to find your own. So you might get one or two sightings if you were lucky. Now, I would say it's pretty guaranteed. So if you want to see a Jaguar, it's a really, really, really good way of getting to see a Jaguar, but you won't, it's pretty unlikely you're going to be watching it on your own. Although having said that, this year we saw a lot actually, and some of them we had the situation where there were a lot of boats there. That top right picture was taken this year. There's probably by the end of it there was probably something like 20 boats surrounding that Jaguar in that big tree. Um, Later on in the trip, there were times when there was just us and one other boat watching a Jaguar, even though we'd radioed out, I think. So it was interesting. Um, the question there that I put up is this a problem? And I actually don't think it is particularly. I don't think it's as much of an issue as all the jeeps surrounding a sort of Pride of Lions or something in Kenya or wherever. And the reason I say that is because having watched the behaviour of the animals whilst we are watching them from these situations, they don't seem the least bit bothered. They don't look at the boats. They might have a little glance in your direction, but on the whole, they just seem to be completely oblivious. They're not the least bit bothered. My concern was, are we upsetting the Jaguars? I don't think we are, because if the Jaguar didn't like it, he's only got to hop over the bank and out of sight for 2 minutes and everybody goes away. They'd learn that pretty fast. They don't bother. They just lie there. So I don't think they're particularly bothered. They carry on hunting whilst there might be 20 boats cruising along in the middle of the water. But if you think about it, we're not actually really affecting them very much. We're not in their way because they're hunting on the bank. So we're not a nuisance to them in that respect. The other thing is, I thought, what if we're affecting the food source for them? So are we frightening capybara? Are we frightening caiman, which is their main two sources of food? And I can tell you, you can be on a boat in the middle of parts of this river and you can be surrounded by caiman. They're not bothered by the boats either. The capybaras don't run off when they see a boat. So I actually don't think we're causing them any trouble. I think the worst thing that it causes is for the viewers. I think for people watching, you feel a little bit like, oh, this is horrible. We've got all these other people here and the noise of their boats and there's a bit of chatter and whatever. And I think that's kind of takes away from it a tiny bit. From the animal's point of view, I don't think we're causing them an issue. And I say that partly because if you watch an animal like this, bear in mind this animal is probably being watched by a dozen boats, and we're just not that far away. We're out in the middle of the river. It's just what it's doing. Sorry, I hope you've got your volume turned to a reasonable level on your computer. But this is just I just find this utterly thrilling, even watching it on the screen. Imagine that for in real life. Smell something there. Isn't that fantastic? So, as I say, doesn't even look up at the boats, not bothered. Um, and if sometimes you'll find a jaguar and it's just asleep on the bank, and you can sit there for an hour and it doesn't do anything other than have a little scratch now and again or something. But other times you get to view things like that, an animal actually hunting, and we had some wonderful views of hunting ones this year. But then a couple of years ago, well, I'll click to the next one, and you'll probably gasp at the sight. Um, we're clearly not frightening away the prey, and we're clearly not preventing it from hunting quite successfully. On that particular year, we saw them make two kills, and this was the first one. I was frustrated that I wasn't videoing at the time when it dived into the water, vanished into all this vegetation at the edge of the river, and then nothing happened, and then there was a bit of splashing, and then nothing happened, and then all of a sudden it appeared with that in its mouth. It's a massive caiman, and again, bit of video just to show you the strength of this animal. Just look at it. The, the power in its jaws. I mean, what does that caiman weigh? Completely paralyzed it, biting it through the back of the neck. Seems to be making life easy for itself. But isn't that just incredible? And a few moments later, it reached a part of the bank that it was obviously trying to get to, and it literally just leapt almost vertically up maybe 10 foot of bank and disappeared over the top with it. I mean, astonishing. So, as I said, I think the problem of that many boats is more an issue for the people than it is for the animals. I don't think we're actually causing them a huge amount of trouble, and that makes me feel more comfortable about doing this. I genuinely feel, having seen what I've seen, that it's fine. But what an animal! Yeah, the I've just seen a jaguar feeling. That's my wife, Jane. Some of you might know her. On the first trip we did after our first ever jaguar. She does look pretty pleased, doesn't she? I can remember that feeling very well. So that's the big target at the Pantanal, the Jaguar. As I say, lots of other stuff to see there. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. But there's still one more bit of the holiday to finish. And so from here, we take a flight, head to Iguazu. So it's from really, I'm sort of quite amused at myself coming up with that, from the world's largest wetland to the world's largest vertical wetland. This is the biggest waterfall in the world. So it is utterly jaw-dropping. I don't know how to put into words what this place is like. The scale of it is like nowhere else. I mean, I've been to other large waterfalls in the world, but this one is way and beyond anywhere else I've been. The size of it, I mean, you look at the figures there, it's a complex of waterfalls, I suppose you could say, but it's all coming down from one river. And it's 2.7 kilometers long. Not that the river's that wide there, but if you follow the edge of the waterfall, it obviously contours in and out, and it goes right up, sort of. It starts on one bank, but it goes further up the river before it comes to this chasm, which is known as the Devil's Throat, which I'll show you soon. And because of all this ins and outs, the whole length of it is over 2.5 kilometers. It's a massive, massive place. And they've done a fabulous job of giving you viewpoints. So there's these great walkways that you can go out on. I have to say, you have to just take your bird watcher's brain out a little bit and just go, right, I'm a tourist today. You'll be in amongst a lot of people. It's immensely popular. A lot of people go. But it's just so worth it. It really is. There's a black vultures in the background. There's a lot of them around there. But what a place. It's just remarkable. It really is. And we have 2 full days, 2.5 really. So we have the day that we arrive where we go and see it from the Brazilian side. We then cross over into Argentina, which is where our lodge is. And then we spend 2 days where we kind of bird watching for sort of half the day, and half the day we are visiting the waterfall. And these lovely walkways give you lots of different angles, lots of different approaches to it. You can get close to it, you can view it from afar. So it's when I first went and I thought, gosh, that's an awful lot of time looking at a waterfall. And I thought, when you get there, it really isn't. It's just fabulous. I mentioned the Devil's Throat a second ago. So to get to that, you go over this walkway, as you can see in the bottom left there, that crosses out across the river via two or three little islands. And then you finally come to this platform where you get to view this. I don't know how to describe that. I put two photos there, both of the same view to some extent, um, and different years. So one year there'd been a huge amount of rain just before we got there. That was when it was all brown and the water levels were really high. But even on a year when the water levels are lower and it's clear, it's just utterly spectacular. And the power of it and the size of it and the whole, oh, you cannot put it into words. You really can't. You have to be there. And it's the most incredible place. So, as I said, we spend time enjoying the waterfall, which you have to just give some time to. And I can remember not wanting to walk away from that place. It was incredible. Just trying to get it into my head somehow. But within the area, there are also other pathways that are much quieter and are much more bird rich. And it's a very good birding area. There's probably more like rainforest there. Um, and you can see a lot of birds. It's not easy bird watching compared to some areas. So in the Chapada that we were in earlier on, in the Cerrado rather, it's everything's much more at eye level. Here you're looking up into the trees a lot, but there's a lot of birds, and we do see quite a good list. This is a really tough bird to see sometimes, so I was really chuffed to get a photo of it. This is spot-backed antshrike, and they tend to be very skulking and in the denser stuff. So we play a bit of recording to try and coax it out. And look at that, it's a great-looking bird. And there's lots to see. Um, Many different kinds of tanagers there. I love that name, black goggled tanager. They do have all that black around their eyes, and then magpie tanager top right really does look rather like a magpie. Green-headed tanager, of course, has got a blue head. But yes, it's there are just a lot of birds, as well as sort of some of these really colourful ones. There's lots of little brown ones, so you can have that fun if you like to set yourself a challenge, try and do the fly catchers. Some of them are really tricky. Um, Eared pygmy tyrant, bottom right. That's not much bigger than a gold crest. Tiny, tiny little flycatcher with almost no tail. Lots and lots to see. Piculates, top left. That's actually is a genuine species of woodpecker, proper woodpecker, but really, really small. Probably only 3.5 inches or something. So it's lots and lots of different kinds of birds to see. I could have done multiple slides like that of birds that you can see in that area. This is more on kind of forest trails away from the waterfall, but even when you're doing the trails around the waterfall itself, there's still birds to look out for. Um, on that main picture there of the people walking, you can see there's an animal on the path, and amongst them almost, that's a southern coati. I'll show you those in a minute. So there is animals too. All the birds around that frame there are all birds you can see within that area, including things like blue-crowned trogon, which is a beautiful thing. And the plush-crested jays, the top left, what a very weird face, peculiar facial expression. They are remarkably tame, like some of the crow family can be. And they will, in some areas, actually come down and feed from your hand if you hold out food. You're not really meant to, so I must admit we don't encourage it, but we do see a lot of people feeding them, or they'll come and they'll just land on the handrail right beside you, being kind of hopeful, with this rather shocked expression all the time. It's really peculiar. So yes, lots to see as you're walking around. Um, some years there's tons of butterflies. One year it had rained and the paths were a bit wet, and I think the that was um, soaking some of the minerals out of the soil that the butterflies were coming down to and licking. So fantastic butterflies some years, including those ones with the rings underneath. They're called the 88 butterfly for obvious reasons. There are a few animals too. Um, as you can see, top left in the main picture, those are the southern coatis. They're just delightful looking little things, very inquisitive, great fun. And then there's the black-capped capuchins. You have to be a bit, um, you have to be a bit careful of them. They, and it's interesting how things have changed. When I first started going, we used to buy pasties sometimes and sit out on the picnic benches eating them. But the coatis would literally suddenly jump up from nowhere. You wouldn't see them coming, and suddenly it'd be on the tabletop in front of you, snatching the pasty out of your hand. The capuchins were actually worse because they were quite vicious, and you would they would bare their teeth at you and look like they were going to bite you. And there were posters up saying, don't feed the animals. And on the posters were photographs of people's hands with huge gashes in them of where they've been actually either bitten or scratched by these animals. So they've kind of sorted that out now. So the bottom picture of the caged animals down there, it kind of made me laugh this year. It's the first time I've been back since they've done this. And what they do now, they're not keeping the animals out to stop them from stealing your pasties. They're keeping you in. So they actually, you buy your pasty, then you sit inside a cage so that the animals can't get to you. And I think it's a brilliant solution, but it's kind of amusing. We couldn't help laughing at ourselves, all sat inside this cage, as if, the people walking by outside might look in and look at these caged animals. But anyway, quite good fun. Bottom left is an agouti, which is another kind of rodent, a bit like a sort of woodland capybara in a way, except much smaller, very timid. And they're lovely little things. Another thing we do while we're in the area is we visit this lovely garden where they put food out for hummingbirds. They've got hummingbird feeders. They get about 7 or 8 species most times. Some of them superb. The one in the middle there, swallow-tailed hummingbird, is a big one with that huge forked tail. So that's quite spectacular. Whereas verticolored hummingbird, bottom right, is a tiny little one, absolutely delightful. But they get other stuff as well. They put fruit out and they get tanagers coming in, sometimes woodpeckers. So I just want to finish off with how we finish the holiday. So on the last afternoon, we go back to the waterfalls. We have a lovely look at it from various angles, and we are quite privileged because the guide who takes us here, he works quite often for the park department as a ranger, as a guide, and he has his own key and he has permission to be there after the park has closed. So round about 5 o'clock or so, everybody gets kicked out. But because we're with him, we get to stay in and we have the park to ourselves, which feels remarkably privileged. It's the time of day where things are going to roost. These toucans are gathering in the tree before they go off to roost. There's a lot of vultures coming in. They're roosting in trees on this island. Probably about 500 or so of them roost there. But the main spectacle, the main reason we stay there, which it saddens me in a way because all the other people don't get to witness this. But as I say, I feel very, very privileged. These are great dusky swifts, and they come into roost behind the waterfall, which is remarkable. And I remember the first time I went, I knew about this because I'd seen footage of it on one of these David Attenborough programs years and years ago, Life of Birds or whatever it was, of these swifts actually flying through the water and then spending the night behind the waterfall itself. And it's an astonishing sight, to see these birds going in and doing this. And you look at it and you think it's just ridiculous. Why aren't they just washed away to their deaths? And you just wonder if some of them are. Some of them are quite sensible and they choose not to go behind the water. So there are almost like little gaps between the waterfalls, and some of them are roosting, as you can see there on the cliff face. But others very definitely do fly through the water. I don't think they're just looking for gaps. I think they choose areas where the water's really thin and then they just go for it. So here is what we witness on the last afternoon. So you can see all those swifts gathering. Just watch. Dum, dum, gone. Just disappear into there. And there are hundreds of them. Absolutely hundreds of them. I don't know why it excites me quite so much, but it just seems such an astonishing spectacle to be in this place and see this behaviour. Look at them coming in. I just think it's the most astonishing thing, and I feel very lucky to have seen it. So, with a holiday where you've already got highlights like Jaguars and stuff like that, to finish off on that on the last day, I always think is a really great way to finish the holiday and to finish my talk. So, thank you very much for the group of you that have come to listen. I hope you enjoyed it.